سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا عدوي وعدوكم أولياء تلقون إليهم بالمودة وقد كفروا بما جاءكم من الحق يخرجون الرسول وإياكم أن تؤمنوا بالله ربكم إن كنتم خرجتم جهادا في سبيلي وابتغاء مرضاتي تسرون إليهم بالمودة وأنا أعلم بما أخفيتم وما أعلنتم ومن يفعله منكم فقد ضل سواء السبيل. إن يثقفوكم يكونوا لكم أعداء ويبسطوا إليكم أيديهم وألسنتهم بالسوء وودوا لو تكفرون. لن تنفعكم أرحامكم ولا أولادكم يوم القيامة يفصل بينكم والله بما تعملون بصير. قد كانت لكم أسوة حسنة في إبراهيم والذين معه إذ قالوا لقومهم إنا براء منكم ومما تعبدون من دون الله كفرنا بكم وبدا بيننا وبينكم العداوة والبغضاء أبدا حتى تؤمنوا بالله وحده إلا قول إبراهيم لأبيه لأستغفرن لك وما أملك لك من الله من شيء ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير. ربنا لا تجعلنا فتنة للذين كفروا واغفر لنا ربنا إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. لقد كان لكم فيهم أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر ومن يتول فإن الله هو الغني الحميد. عسى الله أن يجعل بينكم وبين الذين عاديتم منهم مودة والله قدير والله غفور رحيم. لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. إنما ينهاكم الله عن الذين قاتلوكم في الدين وأخرجوكم من دياركم وظاهروا على إخراجكم أن تولوهم ومن يتولهم فأولئك هم الظالمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا جاءكم المؤمنات مهاجرات فامتحنوهن الله أعلم بإيمانهن فإن علمتموهن مؤمنات فلا ترجعوهن إلى الكفار لا هن حل لهم ولا هم يحلون لهن وآتوهم ما أنفقوا ولا جناح عليكم أن تنكحوهن إذا آتيتموهن أجورهن ولا تمسكوا بعصم الكوافر واسألوا ما أنفقتم وليسألوا ما أنفقوا ذلكم حكم الله يحكم بينكم والله عليم حكيم وإن فاتكم شيء من أزواجكم إلى الكفار فعاقبتم فآتوا الذين ذهبت أزواجهم مثل ما أنفقوا واتقوا الله الذي أنتم به مؤمنون يا أيها النبي إذا جاءك المؤمنات يبايعنك على ألا يشركن بالله شيئا ولا يسرقن ولا يزنين ولا يقتلن أولادهن ولا يأتين ببهتان يفترينه بين أيديهن وأرجلهن ولا يعصينك في معروف فبأيهن واستغفر لهن الله إن الله غفور رحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتولوا قوما غضب الله عليهم قد يئسوا من الآخرة كما يئس الكفار من أصحاب القبور صدق الله العلي العظيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا يصلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله.
بل محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
ننھے لحد سے اٹھ کر مادر کے پاس آو، اصغر تمہارے خاطر جھولا تھما ہوا ہے، اصغر تمہارے خاطر جھولا تھما ہوا ہے۔ اکبر کے پاس آ کر مولا ایک کشمکش میں کس طرح نکلے برچی سینہ چیدہ ہوا ہے، کس طرح نکلے برچی سینہ چیدہ ہوا ہے۔ قاسم کا پیارا چہرہ اور اس پہ خون کے دارے، شبیر کا بھتیجا دولہا بنا ہوا ہے، شبیر کا بھتیجا دولہا بنا ہوا ہے۔ اکبر کی نوجوانی آرام کر رہی ہے، روشن چراغ تو ہے لیکن بجھا ہوا ہے، روشن چراغ تو ہے لیکن بجھا ہوا ہے۔ مولا کے پاس کیا ہے اب وقت عصر باقی، اصغر کا ایک گلا تھا وہ بھی چھیدا ہوا ہے، اصغر کا ایک گلا تھا وہ بھی چھیدا ہوا ہے۔ خیمے سے باہر آ کر بچی نے یہ پکارا، بابا کا میرا لاشا کس جان پرا ہوا ہے، بابا کا میرا لاشا کس جان پرا ہوا ہے۔ ایمان کی آیتوں سے जंगल बसा हुआ है, बिखरा हुआ ज़मीं पर कुरान पढ़ा हुआ है। पर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sayyid Hasan Rizvi, respected elders, brothers, sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all the names listed on the screen and Kul Arwahil Mu'mineen wal Mu'minat, Sawab al-Fatiha. Ayat-e Yajiban is requested for all the names listed on the screen and whoever is in need of it here and elsewhere. Let us all recite it together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu su. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu su. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Now let us invite Sayyid to come forward to recite tonight's madness. Par Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, Salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا والنبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين للتورى بمقدمه الفداء ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. مؤمنين مؤمنات, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On the occasion of the wilada of the 8th Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farjahum. We had talked a little bit about some of the doubts and the confusions amongst the Shias at that point. This continued until after his death as well. And almost nearly with every single imam, there was always some sort of doubt and confusion about where imamat would continue. Who was the next imam in line? So after the death of the 8th imam, the Shias had once again splintered off into a few different groups and argued and debated about who was the new imam, who was the next imam. Now there were some who, because of their closeness to the 8th imam, they had heard directly from him, they had heard from reliable sources, so they had no issues, they had no shak and no doubt. But there were many who were far away, they weren't close enough, they hadn't kept up contact with him, so they were stuck in confusion. And the reason many of them were confused, even some of them after hearing reports that his son, right, Imam al-Jawad alayhi salatu wasalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala alihi, that he was supposed to be the imam, they were confused. They said, look, he's only 8 years old, 9 years old. This has not happened in the history of imamat. How can somebody like this become the imam? And some of them had a legitimate excuse, because many of them, according to some of our ulama, said, look, isn't one of the shara'it, the conditions of imamah being baligh? He's not even baligh yet. How can this boy, how can this little kid, I mean, we're not saying he's not knowledgeable, but how can he be a leader? How can he be an imam? So some of them were confused about this idea because it hadn't happened yet. When this happened, again, the Shias had splintered off. One of them, or some groups of Shias, they had joined this previous group that had formed during the time of the 7th Imam, the Waqifis. So the Waqifi group, as many of you know, after the Shahadat of the 7th Imam, many of them stopped there. They did waqf, right? That's where Waqifi comes from. They did waqf, they stopped, and they said, the 7th is the final Imam, and that's it. And some even considered him the Mahdi as well, and that he went into ghaiba. So there is different groups among Waqifis then. So some Shias, after the 8th Imam dies, and they're confused, and people are saying, oh, his son, this 9-year-old, he's the Imam. They're like, no, this can't be. This doesn't make any sense. Maybe those Waqifis had the right idea. Maybe the 7th was the last one, because there's no way that this little boy could be the Imam. So they jumped and joined the Waqifis. Another group of Shias decided to follow the brother of the 8th Imam, whose name was Abdullah ibn Musa ibn Ja'far, also known as Al-Awkalani. He wasn't a bad person. He was a good companion, right? A good member of the Ahlul Bayt. But the problem is that he spoke in areas and in matters when he shouldn't have. He took positions that he shouldn't have taken. People had come to them and said, look, your nephew, who's 9 years old, can't be the Imam. So we're following the sunnah before. From Imam Hussein, or after Imam Ali, instead of the son, or instead of the oldest, sometimes it would transfer over to the brother, right? So from Imam Ali alayhi salam, it went to his son, Imam Hasan. Then from Imam Hasan to Imam Hussein. Said, okay, so sometimes it can transfer to brothers. That's not a problem. It doesn't always have to go to children. Some of them applied this principle and said, maybe the brother of the 8th Imam, Abdullah, maybe he's going to be the Imam then. So they started following him. Now, what went on in his mind, we don't really have too much information, so we're not really sure. But the Shias, the ones who knew better, they said, you know what? If we're going to follow this person, Abdullah, as the Imam, we need to make sure he's actually the Imam. Yes, there is a sunnah previously that a brother can be the Imam, but we need to make sure he actually fits the criteria. So they said, the best way we can tell is by asking him questions. Legal questions, fiqhi questions. Let's see if he knows the answers. So there was a session, and according to many narrations, the 9th Imam was present as well. So he was there in that session. This 9-year-old, 8-year-old young boy was there. The main point there was the group of individuals, all these ulama, all these big Shias were trying to see, okay, who really is the Imam? They were ready to follow Abdullah. He's the eldest, right? It should be him. But some of them said, you know what, maybe it is this youngster. Let's just see what happens. So they go to the gathering, and they start asking various questions to Abdullah. Every single one, he just fails. He gives incorrect answers. And immediately they start saying, no, this is impossible. It can't be the case. But Imam al-Jawad is sitting there, and he answers every single thing correctly. So then they say, yes, this child then has to be the Imam, and this person can't be. And in that session as well, Imam Jawad turns to his uncle, and he's ashamed. He says, Ya Amma, oh uncle, have taqwa. It will be very difficult for you to stand in front of Allah after you die on Yawm al-Qiyamah, when Allah says to you, why were you issuing fatwa when you knew nothing? why did you allow people to get attracted to you like this? Why did you take positions of leadership in imamah when you knew it wasn't yours? And he asked the imam to pray for him, he did istighfar, he said, I shouldn't have done that, and he did tawbah. Inshallah, his tawbah is accepted. What's interesting here, as we talked about, almost every single time of the imams, there was always this confusion happening. Some of them were able to fix and solve the solution, and find the solution and solve the confusion, to get rid of their doubts. What did they do? Instead of causing fitnas, instead of fear-mongering, instead of saying, oh my God, where is Allah? Why is this happening to us? And having these crippling doubts and stress and anxiety, they said, look, we don't know who the imam is, but we have a system in place. All we have to do is research, investigate, and we'll figure it out. So right away, they gathered the ulama among the Shias, the fuqaha, the ones who knew. They went to this Abdullah and they went to Imam al-Jawad and they asked the questions. Once they saw where haqq was, they immediately followed the imam. So they knew which questions to ask. So the first point of reflection here is that whenever we have these types of confusions, there's no reason for us to panic. There's no reason for us to cause issues in the community. It's okay as long as we know how to research, how to investigate, who to ask, and more importantly, what sort of questions to ask. If you remember, these past few nights, the series that we've been going through about trying to reaffirm the basic principles of our deen, to reestablish that wikala system, to be strengthened in our aqa'id, to not succumb to false claims and fake ideologies that many are spreading right now, even within the Shia faith. Many of these individuals, when they're giving these new controversial ideas, and you and I are kind of confused, okay, is this right or wrong? Right? They're saying this is something we've been doing is authentic, and they're coming along and saying, no, this is inauthentic. They're coming along and challenging a lot of our beliefs. What are we supposed to do? So many people, they just listen to those lectures. They say, you know what, let me keep an open mind, let me listen. And they do that. But the problem is this, they don't know the right questions to ask. Everybody feels that they have enough information at their disposal that they can listen to any speaker, any lecturer, any scholar from any background. Forget Shias. I've heard individuals say, you know what, I'm going to go listen to a Buddhist. I'll listen to this, this guru, this spiritual master, and I'll take whatever is good from them. What's wrong with that? I said, well, there's nothing wrong with that per se. How do you know what's in line with Islam and what's not? When you're listening to these non-Shias or questionable Shia speakers and scholars, how do you know which things are authentic Shia beliefs and which things they're just kind of, not making up as they go along, but things which are clearly based on weak, false arguments? How are you and I going to be able to determine that? Okay, without any, arrogance here, I might be in a better position because I've studied in the Hawza, so I know legal principles, usul al-fiqh, hadith ideas, all these things. Okay, so I can ask the right questions. But if you haven't studied this stuff before, and somebody gives you these types of arguments, what are you going to do? You see, remember we were talking about this wikala system. Why is it that some of these Shias knew exactly what to do? Because they had kept their ilm strong. They had kept in contact with the imams and they knew the right questions to ask. Because when they asked Abdullah, a good person, member of the Ahlul Bayt, he was a good guy. When they asked him the questions, they knew that he was giving the wrong answers. The only way they could have known he was giving the wrong answers is if they knew what the 8th Imam's answers were. If they knew what the 7th Imam's answers were. If they knew the 6th Imam, 5th Imam, all the way to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. They understood Tawheed, they understood Nubuwah, and that's how they understood Imamah, Wilaya, and the Hujjah of their time. Isn't this exactly the dua, the advice that the 6th Imam was giving last night, that we need ma'rifah of Allah, of Tawheed, then we need ma'rifah of Nubuwah, of the Prophet, and then we need ma'rifah, and then we'll understand the Hujjah, Imamah, Wilaya. Otherwise, we're going to be misguided in our deen. And this is exactly what happened to many Shias in every single era. Because they didn't understand Tawheed, they didn't understand Nubuwah, of course they couldn't figure out who the Imam was. Over here you see this strong group of Shias who had kept together, who were constantly in contact with the Imams, with other ulama. They knew what the position of the Ahlul Bayt always were. So they knew exactly how to test these fake Imams that were coming out. They knew when somebody was making a false claim or not. Now think about us. We want to apply it right now. Everybody wants to know, how am I going to recognize the Imam of the time? We know there's going to be false fake people. Right now there's people who are claiming that they're the 12th Imam, right? So when they say that, how are you and I going to know? How do we know which questions to ask? Which questions are the right questions? You know, in the Slido questions last night, one of the responses, one of the answers was, we need to know our ahkam and legal rulings. Now, that wasn't the correct answer, but it's not going to hurt, right? Because if somebody claims to be the Imam, and they come and give some outlandish ideas and rulings, which might sound nice to you and I, because we're in the West, and it's modern, and it makes our lives easier. So some of you might say, yeah, that sounds like the Imam, sounds great. But it might be completely antithetical and contradictory to the path of the Ahlul Bayt. But how are you and I going to know that? I mean, constantly I'm getting the same sort of questions over and over again. Music and mut'a and LGBTQ stuff and all the same stuff, every single community. Youth, elders, it doesn't matter. Everybody asks the same stuff over and over again. Now again, you can keep asking, that's good, and we'll keep trying to explain this stuff, no problem. But there's an issue there, right? Because if we don't have that stuff settled in our minds, and somebody comes and claims to be the Imam, or a Shia speaker has a different sort of unorthodox, non-traditional idea, and it spreads in the community as things are spreading right now online, how are you and I going to protect our iman? How are we going to protect our aqidah and aqaid? If we don't know the right questions to ask, then we won't recognize the Imam of the time. And we don't even have to go that far. Forget about recognizing the Imam of the time for a second. Are we actually able to recognize, forget Imam of the time, what about Imam al-Salah, the Imam for namaz? How many times have we gone to various different centers or communities, even other countries, for example, right? And the person, maybe they're an alim, maybe they're not, maybe they have a turban, maybe they don't, an amama, and they're leading salah, and maybe they're making mistakes. Maybe their makhraj is incorrect, or maybe they've made some other issue here and there. I remember once, I won't mention where, but there was a person who, again, wore the garb, right, the libas, and they were leading salah, and in the middle of the salah, they sneezed. What do you think the person said? So when somebody sneezes normally, when you yourself sneeze, what do you say? Alhamdulillah, right? But in salah, are you allowed to just say things like that out of nowhere in the middle of a surah or something like that? No. In the middle of the surah, or the middle of the qira'ah, this person with the libas sneezes and says, Alhamdulillah, and then he says, Astaghfirullah, and continues the salah. Not one word from anybody else. Nobody knew what was going on, except for a few individuals who, they convene afterwards. There's that little group that always comes after the salah, and they're all talking with one another. Was there a mistake? Did something go wrong? Yeah, there was. If we can't even figure out who's supposed to lead prayers, we can't figure out who's supposed to sit on the minbar of the Holy Prophet and give speeches and teach us about Islam, how are you and I going to recognize the Imam of the time who's God's representative on earth? This is two things from this one example of the life and the beginning of the life of the ninth Imam that we should reflect on. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When it comes to the life of Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, usually because there isn't too much in our history books about his life, the same few stories get repeated over and over again, right? Which is fine. It's good to remember those stories. And I'll probably remind us about one of the famous ones. I think out of most of the stories that are told about the ninth Imam, probably the most repeated one over and over again is about the Imam's debate, right? With the famous Qadi, the chief judge of the Abbasids, Yahya ibn Aktha, right? He's this, young 9, maybe 10-year-old. And he's being challenged by the head, the chief judge, the chief judiciary, the Quddat al-Qadi, or Qadi al-Quddat. He's the head of all of the other judges in the Abbasid Islamic Empire. This guy should know Islam, right? Out of everybody else. He should know what he's talking about. So Ma'mun brings Yahya, brings the Imam al-Jawad, and there's a group of ulama and other dignitaries and wealthy people, and all these people and scholars are around watching this debate, right, about what's happening. I mean, it was hardly a debate, right? It was pretty much a destruction. And you all know the story, right? So what's interesting is, I'll remind you about the story in case some of you may have forgotten. So in this gathering, what's interesting is, at the beginning, when Yahya is in front of the Imam, he doesn't just start asking questions right away. He starts off with ihtiram. He actually starts off with a bit of respect. He says, do you give me ijaza? Do you give me permission جُعِلْتُ فِدَاك, may I be sacrificed for you, to ask you a question. This is the head chief judiciary, the head judge, speaking to a 9-year-old who, in his mind right now, this is just some random 9-year-old. Okay, he's a descendant of the Ahlul Bayt, but that's not a huge deal. He's still showing him respect. Remember how Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum, had advised us that both students need to be humble in front of their teachers and teachers need to be humble in front of students. So yes, he was working with the Abbasids, that's not good. Maybe he had some issues and errors in his life, that's not good as well. But at the very least, he showed humility in front of a member of the Ahlul Bayt. And that stands for something, right? We should look at positives when it's the case. How many of us do the same thing when we come to certain other community members that we may disagree with, even when they're elders or ulama or speakers and things like that, right? This sort of humility is something, to be recognized. The Imam replies, he smiles and says, please, yes, ask whatever you want. Go ahead. Yahya asks him, what is your opinion about a muhrim who hunts an animal? So muhrim, as many of you know, muhrim is what? A person who's wearing ihram, right? A muhrim. So when Imam al-Jawad hears this, then instead of answering it, he gives Yahya ibn Aktham a whole list of possibilities about how to answer the question. He said, hold on. You didn't give me enough information. You need to tell me first, did this muhrim, did he kill the animal while he was wearing ihram or not? Was he aware of what he was doing or not? Did he intentionally hunt and kill the animal or not? Was the muhrim a free person or was he a slave? Was he a child or was he an adult? Was it a bird or a different type of animal? Was it a young person? Was he not baligh or was he baligh? Was he a grown-up? Was the muhrim happy with what he did? Was he okay with breaking these rules? Or what did he do tawbah? Was he remorseful and sorrowful for what he had done? Did it happen at day? Did it take place at night? Was the muhrim performing hajj or was he performing umrah? So one by one he's asking all these questions and Yahya is dumbfounded. Because that didn't even cross his mind, all these little intricacies. So this 9-year-old little boy is saying all of these things. So, this pretty much shut him down. He said, okay, I'm definitely recognize this. And this made Ma'mun happy as well. He said, see, I told you. I told you that this person has special divine knowledge. Now, why in the world would Ma'mun, who we know as somebody who is an enemy of the Ahlul Bayt, why would he want to show off the divine knowledge and the gifts of a member of the Ahlul Bayt, a 9-year-old? What was the point of that? Wasn't he sitting in the seat of Khilafah that belonged to that Imam? Wouldn't something like this make the Shias wonder, why wouldn't you give the Imamat and the Khilafah to the Imam al-Jawad? Why are you sitting there? What was the reason for this? So we hear the story sometimes, but we don't know exactly what was going on behind the scenes. Why exactly did Ma'mun organize this debate in the first place? And what were some of the political schemes that was happening there? So let's discuss that, inshallah. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So let's rewind. Let's go now to the first time that Ma'mun had met Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. Many of you again know the same story as well. Ma'mun was on a hunting trip in Baghdad. There, as he's coming by with his, his entourage, right, all his soldiers and things like that. Obviously, you see, that this is Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Khalifa, and all these soldiers are there with their weapons and things like that. So there's, a few kids, and Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam is there amongst these kids playing. Right? They're sitting out there in the desert playing. So when all these kids see Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Khalifa coming, they all get scared and they all run away. Imam al-Jawad doesn't even bat an eye, doesn't blink. He's just sitting there and he continues on. Ma'mun's curious, so he asks, he says, why is it that everybody else ran away, but you didn't? Why did you stay where you were? And, Imam al-Jawad's responses were really interesting, of course. He said, look, the way is really, the street, this area is wide, it's not narrow, so it's not like I'm blocking your way, you can go around me, so I don't have to move because of that reason. And he said, why should I have to fear you? It's not like I'm a criminal, and, I don't think that you're a person who would punish somebody that's innocent, so why would I be afraid of you? And Ma'mun was so impressed with the answer, he said, hold on a second, who are you? What's your name? He said, my name's Muhammad. Now, he could have revealed everything right then, but he doesn't. It's something to think about. He said, okay, Muhammad, but who are you the son of? Who's your father? He says, I'm Muhammad, son of Ali al-Rida alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Then he said, okay, now it makes sense. You're the son, well, I mean, in his head he's thinking the son of the person I just assassinated, the one I just killed. So now once Ma'mun hears all this, now the sort of political cogwheels are now turning in his head. I just took care of his father, but now there's somebody else just like him. At 9 years old, he's talking like this. I need to start getting plans in motion right away. I need to do something. Because if this boy starts speaking, if he starts doing anything, and I just leave him alone, this is going to come back and bite me. See, Ma'mun, his political strategy was very, very smart, right? In terms of somebody who wanted to steal and hold on to power. He was an intelligent person in that sense, right? He was a cunning person. We don't say intelligent, but he was cunning. So when he recognized the intelligence here, then he said, first thing, he's like, okay, so with his father, I, brought him and made him the wali. And this confused a lot of Shias first, right? When he made the 8th Imam the heir apparent, this confused many of the Shias. He said, okay, I tried that, and some Shias were confused, but not everybody. Some of the Shias were not confused by that. He said, I need to figure out a different tactic for him. Because obviously, I don't know if I can make him the heir apparent right now. That might not work. I tried it before, but he might be a little too young. Is there something else I can do? He said, yeah, there is something. I can marry my daughter to him. If I start getting the basic ceremonies ready to get my daughter, Fadl, married to Imam al-Jawad, this is going to be even better than the tricks that I played with his father, the 8th Imam. Now why? I mean, think about it. With the 8th Imam, there was a distant relationship. There were the Alawi family and the Abbasi family. He said, okay, so you come to Khurasan and I'm going to make you the Khalifa after me. So that was pretty much it, and that's how he grabbed the Shias towards him. Right? This was Ma'mun's plan. But over here he thought, there's a better way actually. Because if I marry my daughter to him, then there's a few different things that are going to happen. So definitely, I'll continue to fool the Shias, but there's a few extra types of tricks that will happen over here. Number one is that all of those Shias right now who think that I poisoned his father, they're immediately not going to think this anymore. Now imagine, what Shia would think that, yes, Imam al-Jawad, his father was poisoned by Ma'mun and he's going to marry his daughter. It would never cross anybody's mind. He said there's a group of Shia would definitely get fooled by this. So this exonerates me. So that's one thing. He said the other is because Ma'mun was, to some degree, a Shia. He knew the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. No, he didn't practice very well. He was a munafiq, obviously. He was fasiq. But he knew how to play with the emotional strings of Shia, just like many speakers do as well, don't they? So he played with the strings too. He said, you know what? If I marry my daughter to the 9th Imam, then I know that in the future there is going to be a Mahdi, a Qa'im that's coming. And that will be in my progeny. So that means that this person is not going to stand up against me because I'll be his grandfather, basically, right? He's not going to mess with me. And the Shias won't mess with me at that time because I'll say, hey, Imam al-Mahdi is my great-great-grandchild. You can't touch me. Right? I mean, for us, this sounds like simplistic thinking, but back then, many Shia were fooled by this. The other, he said, look, also, this gives me a great chance to spy on the Shias, to spy on the Imam's activities. I go in, father-in-law comes and drops in, hey, how's everything going, right? He's spying on the family. He can send soldiers in to check what's going on, and the Shias will get confused and say, oh yeah, he's just coming to check on his daughter and son-in-law, that's it. But what they'll be doing is checking up on the Imam's activities, checking up on the Shia's activities. So they'll always be watched. And one of the most important other features as well was that he wanted Shias to lose trust and faith in the concept of imamat and wilayat. Now how? He said, you know what? Once I marry my daughter to the Imam, what I'll start to do is, because I'm the Khalifa, I have all these riches and resources at my disposal, I'll start showering them with money and gifts and gold and dirhams and dinars and all this stuff. I'll send all these maids and all these bondswomen, all these things, and that'll attract this kid, because he's just a young kid right now. It'll attract him towards the dunya. And once he becomes a little bit more materialistic and worldly and dunyawi, then all these Shias now who in their mind know that their Imam can't be somebody who's dunyawi and worldly, they're going to see this and they'll say, you know what, we can't follow him, let's stick with Ma'mun, because he's somebody who's away from the dunya. So this was also a trick for him as well. Think about our own perspective as well. Not in terms of Imams, but think about ulama. I hear this question, sometimes it's a fitna, but sometimes this question or comment or criticism comes up. People talk about the idea of khums, And when scholars or organizations collect the khums, and they say, hey, you know what? Why are all these ulama and these representatives and all these scholars, how come they get nice cars? They have big houses. That's not fair. They're embezzling funds. They're laundering money. They start going on and making this huge story about what's going on there. Why? Because in the back of many people's mind, they're like, you know, you're an alim, you're a scholar. You can't have nice things. You're not allowed to. You can't have a big house. You can't have a nice car. You got to live in a garbage dump, right? That's what you have to live in. That's what you're supposed to do. Your car needs to be breaking down, right? That's an expectation that people have. So when they see, even ulama, forget the imams, even just regular scholars, living a life of quote-unquote luxury, or doing well, whatever way you want to put it, and it's something that maybe you and I don't have access to. Maybe we haven't gotten to that point yet. So that might stir up a little jealousy in us, a little bit of envy, and that envy could lead to causing fitnas and speaking ill things about ulama like this, and starting to make up rumors. So this was what Ma'mun wanted to do as well. He said, if I can do the same thing, then all these poor Shias will say, Ma'mun's only taking care of this guy, the imam, and our imam is stuck in love with this world and doing all this, he's not taking care of us at all. So they would slowly move away from being close to the imam. And this was his objectives. Firstly, so that he could be innocent of poisoning the eighth imam, so that the Imam al-Mahdi would be among his descendants, so he could spy on the imam and his Shias, and so that he could cause the Shias to lose faith and trust in the imam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, what does this have to do with this debate? So, again, let's follow the history here. Ma'mun meets the imam when he's a young kid. He sees, now I found the child, the son of the eighth imam. He's divinely appointed and representative. He's Ahlul Bayt as well. I need to make sure I'm using him for my own purposes. Right? I have to abuse him in that sense. He devises this plan and says, I'm going to try a different tactic. If he's part of my family, it'll be in my benefit. The Shias can't come after me anymore. So then he says, I'm going to marry my daughter to the imam. But some of the other members of the Abbasid family said, wait, hold on a second. You're going to marry your daughter to one of these Alawis? No, we don't allow that. So they came and they protested to Ma'mun. They said, you can't do this. Why would you allow something like this? You need somebody else. You need an Abbasid. You need somebody who's noble. And they were saying to him, don't you know what the Alawis have done to our family? So they made it a family tribal thing too, right? To instill hate in Ma'mun's heart for the imam. Ma'mun said, look, you don't know what I know about this individual, with this young boy. How about you test him? We'll get the most knowledgeable faqih and alim and mujtahid and scholar in all of the Islamic empire. I'll bring him in the court. You guys can all come too. And we'll test this child out and we'll see if he really deserves to marry somebody from our family or not. Then you'll be able to see whether he's divinely guided or not. They said, okay, he's a 9-year-old kid, what is he going to do? This is why Ma'mun organized this debate. To be able to convince the Abbasids that this is a good political move for us to make. Let me marry my daughter, Fadl, to him because this is better for our empire. Now think about it. Let's go back to before we knew this stuff. In our minds, we hear the debate in a lecture or we read it in a book. We're like, oh, it's so great. The imam is showing off his knowledge, and we send a salawat and it's all great. But in the back of the scene, this is ruining the reputation of the imam. Because we know Fadl was a terrible wife. And according to many narrations, she was the one who poisoned the imam. The whole time she was complaining. She sent letters to her father saying, I don't want to live with this person. He doesn't pay, he's not attracted by the world. All this money that you're sending him, your tactics, they're not working. All that money you send, all he does is spend it on the poor in the community. He doesn't spend anything on his own. So all these plans you devised, they're not working out anymore. And of course, that's how Imam al-Jawad replied and answered all of these things. So you see, what we need to keep in mind is this. So we went through a few different points of reflection from various different stages and points and events in the life of the ninth Imam. This final point that I wanted to mention is this. Just like how normally we put a positive spin on this debate of saying, oh, this is great, the Imam is showing his knowledge. It's a mu'jiza, it's wonderful. Behind the scenes, there were individuals who were manipulating this whole tragedy and actually eventually led to the Shahadat of the Imam. So from us, sometimes what we do in many of these events, things that take place right now, from the outside, when we look at things from a very superficial lens, it looks great. And we start praising it. Alhamdulillah that XYZ happened. What a wonderful ni'mah and blessing for the ummah, for the community, or this and that. We say all these things. But the people who have basira and hikmah, of insight and wisdom, they know that there's other questions that they need to ask. They know that there's other principles here that they need to figure out. And when they ask the right questions, they say this is not in line with something that's beneficial to a real Shia and a true Shia. This is not something that's going to protect the institution of wilaya and imamah. And so an incident like this is something that bothers them and damages them. And they then go about figuring out how to solve this sort of situation. So what does that mean for us? Tying it into our whole concept. While we're stuck in this age of doubt and confusion and people who are spreading all these different ideas within the Shia faith, don't take these superficial ideas and kind of new age modern things as something good. Oh, this is wonderful. No. People always tell me, oh, Hasan, it's amazing. On YouTube you can go, all these lectures are available. I said, yeah, with all these thousands of lectures, there's also thousands of opinions. And just even the other day, somebody was telling me, my kids are getting very confused. This person saying one thing about hijab, and these people are saying something else about hijab. This person saying one thing about beard, somebody else is saying another thing about the beard. What are people supposed to do right now? If we don't know the right questions to ask and we're seeing all these different things, then we're going to be stuck. Now, we can be arrogant about it and say, I know how to make the right decision, I have an aql. But let's be honest, if you don't know the right tools, you don't have the right questions to ask, you won't know which one is actually based on the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, based on the Quran, based on the Hadith, based on the continuing message of wilayah that has been passed down continuously in the hawza from our ulama. And which things are these sort of, cool, shiny, wonderful new ideas, but don't actually have any ilmi academic backing to them. If we don't know the right questions to ask, we're going to become superficial modern Shias in this sense. So we have to be very, very careful. When things go on in the community, when we're researching, whatever it is, don't just take things at the surface level. Always try to ask more. And if you don't know what to ask somebody else who knows as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It's a pity and a tragedy. Imam al-Jawad was the youngest imam, but he also died very early as well. He didn't live very long as an imam, maybe 20 so years or so. He lived, and during his lifetime, he was alive with two Abbasid Khalifas. The first, of course, was Ma'mun, who, relatively speaking, actually treated him well. Yes, he did spy on him and all this, fine. And he had these plots. But outwardly, he was praising the imam to everybody. He was talking about how great he was as a member of Ahlul Bayt. He would send him money over and over again in golds and riches, which of course the imam spent on the poor. But when the next one, Al-Mu'tasim, comes in, Al-Mu'tasim is not compared to Ma'mun, wasn't an intelligent or cunning individual. He had a huge hatred for Imam al-Jawad. And he also fell prey to some of the advisors around him who were jealous of the knowledge of Imam al-Jawad. Within 2 years of the lifetime of Al-Mu'tasim, 2 years he was a Khalifa, is when he says, you know what, I can't handle this person, Al-Jawad. I can't handle him anymore. So according to some narrations, he gives this advice and he gives this order and makes a deal with Fadl, right, his niece. He says, if you poison Al-Jawad, then whatever riches you want, whatever gold you want is at your disposal. I'll give you whatever you want. And we know that Fadl never really had love for the Imam anyway. So based on that, they say that she put a little bit of this poison, but it was a very strong poison, in his food. Some of our ulama say that the poison that was given to Imam al-Jawad was very similar to the type of poison that was given to Imam al-Hasan. They say that it coursed throughout all of his body. It wasn't just one area, but that poison coursed through all throughout the body of Imam al-Jawad, just like it went through Imam al-Hasan, and it changed the color of his skin. The same way Imam Hasan turned to green, they say Imam al-Jawad turned to green. The same way they say Imam al-Hasan was spitting up pieces of his liver, they say Imam al-Jawad was spitting up some of his organs as well. The same way Imam al-Hasan was around his family, was around his companions, was around loved ones, Imam al-Jawad was also around his loved ones. But there was something different between the Shahadat of both of these individuals. As we know, Imam al-Jawad was honored. He was taken by the Shias after he had passed on and was buried with his grandfather. And now he's there buried with his grandfather in Kadhmain, in Kadhmiya. But what happens when Imam al-Hasan becomes Shaheed, and now he wants to be buried with his grandfather as well? When the janazah goes up and leaves the house of the Ahlul Bayt, as they take that janazah outside, instead of being met with love, instead of being met with salawat and praises, the body, the janazah of Imam al-Hasan is being hit with arrow after arrow after arrow. As Imam Hasan wants to go closer and closer to his grandfather. In the same way, Imam al-Jawad is going next to his grandfather, Imam al-Kadhim. Imam al-Hasan wants to be next to Rasulullah, as was his wish, both of their wishes. As they get closer and closer, more and more arrows come to the body, the dead body of Imam al-Hasan. Finally, they're ordered to turn around and to go back to the house. And when they come back to the house, those same loved ones who are ready to bury Imam al-Hasan with his grandfather Rasulullah are now taking the arrows one by one from this janazah. This white cloth sitting on the tabut, people ask, why is it sometimes we put all this red on top of the tabut? Sometimes it's because we remember that this white cloth that we want to put on was turned red by the arrows set by the so-called companions of Rasulullah, shooting arrows at the body, the dead body of Imam al-Hasan. The janazah came out in white cloth and came back drenched in blood, drenched in the red color. When it came there, they say Imam Hussein and Hazrat Abbas were taking out arrow after arrow. Bibi Zainab sees this and says, don't let me be somebody who's not taking care of my own brother. And she begins to pull the arrows one by one from the body of Imam Hasan. Abbas and Hussein say, Bibi, this is not something for a woman to do. Let us take care of this. He says, what kind of sister would I be if I wouldn't take care of my brother? If there's a pain in his body, I should be the one to take care of it. Bibi Zainab, we would say to you, when the arrows hit the chest of Hussein on the plains of Karbala, what will you be able to do then? So many arrows will be in the chest of Imam Hussein that when he falls off his horse, his body won't even touch the ground. ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, میں خاک کربلا ہوں رتبہ میرا جدا ہے میں خاک کربلا ہوں رتبہ میرا جدا ہے میں خاک کربلا ہوں رتبہ میرا جدا ہے بنت علی نے مجھ کو چادر بنا لیا ہے میں خاک کربلا ہوں رتبہ میرا جدا ہے میں خاک کربلا ہوں رتبہ میرا جدا ہے اکبر جوان قاسم غازی سے چاند تارے زین العبان میری آغوش میں اتارے یعنی لہو نبی کا مجھ میں ملا ہوا ہے میں خاک کربلا ہوں رتبہ میرا جدا ہے میں خاک کربلا ہوں رتبہ میرا جدا ہے روتی ہوں یاد کر کے وہ بے کسی کا منظر مولا چھپا رہے تھے مجھ میں وہ لاش اصغر اس دن سے آج تک نہ مجھ کو سکون ملا ہے میں خاک کربلا ہوں رتبہ میرا جدا ہے میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے، شہدائے کربلا کے زخموں کو میں نے چوما، زہرا کی بیٹیوں کے قدموں کو میں نے چوما، اس واسطے ہی میری تاثیر میں شفا ہے، میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے، میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے۔ اکبر کی لاش پر جب شبیر جا رہے تھے، اٹھتے تھے بیٹھتے تھے اور لڑکھڑا رہے تھے، منظر وہ ابھی میری آنکھوں میں پھر رہا ہے، میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے، میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے۔ اے زائرین مولا چلنا یہاں سنبھل کر، قرآن فاطمہ کا بکھرا ہوا ہے مجھ پر، نہ جانے کس جگہ پر کس کا لہو گرا ہے، میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے، میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے۔ بنت علی نے مجھ کو چادر بنا لیا ہے، میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے، میں خاک کربلا ہوں، رتبہ میرا جدا ہے۔ الفاتحہ۔
السلام علیکہ یا رسول اللہ، السلام علیکہ یا امیر المومنین، السلام علیکہ یا فاطمۃ الزہراء سیدۃ نساء العالمین، السلام علیکہ یا حسن المجتبی، السلام علیکہ یا اختک زینب، السلام علی الحسین وعلی علی ابن الحسین وعلی اولاد الحسین وعلی اصحاب الحسین جميعا شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولا وابن مولا، السلام عليك يا غريب الغربة، السلطان أبو الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا، كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا إمام صاحب العصر والزمان، الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان، أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسحر الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا من أنصارك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.